Today we're talking about boards, not that kind of board that I rolled in on, but these boards behind me. We're going to go through the Jamboard, the Webex Board, and the Microsoft Surface Hub 2S. We're going to take you through what we think about it. Let's get into it. All right, we're back and we've stopped riding the e-bikes and the boards, and we're going to talk about the boards that we're talking about today, which is the Webex Board, the Jamboard, and the Microsoft Surface Hub 2S. So Marshall, thanks for stepping through this with me.
Yeah, this is actually a good comparison. A lot of similarities and capabilities, but there are some fine differences.
So we broke it up, I guess, really into a couple areas. We wanted to talk about the physical nature of each of the units. We wanted to talk about their whiteboard capabilities. We also wanted to talk about their content and collaboration. Lastly, we're going to talk about the conferencing and calling, and then to wrap it up, put a bow on it, we're gonna go through the use cases. So let's start with the overall physical nature of each of the units, and pick one. What do you want to start?
Yeah, let's actually start with the Jamboard, since the stand on the Jamboard is definitely unique.
I like it.
Yeah, well, I think it serves a purpose. It's very large, very stable.
You know what? You mentioned large. It is super large when you compare it to like the Microsoft board.
Yep.
Yeah, I agree.
But it is very stable, and it has very large cast, wheels, and I think that helps when you're kind of rolling it possibly in between, school classrooms, inside, outside, over little bumps, and then it's banging into things. So that's the use case, perfect.
Well, the stability of it, I think because the wheels are so far out, it gives it that stability that you're talking about. The other thing I noticed, I think they did it on purpose, and in the review of it, you can get it in and out of a door because you kind of just have to like use some geometry to do it, and it kind of weaves out of there.
Yeah, it's actually wider from wheel to wheel than the doors, so you have to kind of position the one wheel in and then out or get it perfectly through. Obviously, if you have a very large, doorway entry, no problem, but yeah, that's a big difference.
But comparing that to the Microsoft Surface, it has a smaller footprint. You could just roll it right through a doorway, but I don't think you would have as much stability. I mean, that thing is probably meant to be hit by a kid or.
Yeah, that's why I think there's different. I think it has a different use case. Microsoft's, the board itself is almost borderless in terms of the screen to edge. Looks very modern, but man, if you banged that into something, I could see, breaking that screen. While the Jamboard has a big rubber edge around the entire screen, almost meant to like kind of be rough and tumble and be able to bonk into things. So yeah, some real big differences that I think contribute to possibly a different use case. Microsoft's seems more kind of in an office building, while the Jamboard, in my mind, seems like it might be more geared for kind of a classroom style.
Yeah, so let's talk about the screen, the Jamboard screen.
The Jamboard screen has a very reflective kind of coating. It looks like a traditional TV that you would have in your house.
Yeah, my opinion, I feel like the TV on it looked a little like consumer grade as opposed to the other two seem a little bit more commercial.
Yeah, and it, again, might contribute to, it being for a different type of audience.
Yeah.
It doesn't have a reflective coating, while the Microsoft, Surface and the Webex board, they both kind of look more geared for the enterprise and business, and they have like a nice reflective coating. They also feel a little better on the touch too.
Yeah. Price point, the Jamboard is the lowest cost, followed by the Surface Hub, followed by the Webex board, typically in cost, right?
Right.
And so I think, we also have to think about that, the Jamboard maybe half the cost of maybe the Webex board. So those are factors as well. Maybe that's why you have more of a consumer grade with Jamboard.
Yeah, and I think we see those differences through other, components, including, the camera and the web camera. So that makes a lot of sense. I think the last one that we should kind of call out is on the Webex board. The stand that it has is definitely very robust, looks great, but one major difference is it doesn't come with wheels. So it really looks like it's meant to be more of a permanent fixture that you would put into a conference room or onto the, where you don't want a wall mount for whatever reason. Maybe the back of the wall is, brick, but you want to have an electronic whiteboard And so it makes a lot of sense. But yeah, it's a different use case. It's more of a corporate kind of device than something I would see wheeling around.
Right. You can get a different mount for it that has wheels, right?
You can, and one of the companies that's very popular is AV Tech. They make some really robust carts that have wheels. There's a whole bunch of different, I mean, theirs might be on the pricier side, but it's a great cart.
Okay. So to wrap up the Jamboard before we move into the next board, we talked about the screen. We talked about how we liked the stand. It was robust. We talked about the edging around the display. The last thing we didn't really talk about is the tilt capability and also the camera. One of the things that I like the tilt idea. The one thing I don't really like is when you're using it for video and you're actually using the whiteboard, the camera's kind of useless. It's just like a headshot, like the top of the head, at least for my height. It wasn't like a face shot,
Yeah. So we noticed that some of the, like the Webex board, it has a technology within its camera to always give you like best view, which was great. So wherever you're standing, it kind of follows you around. On the Jamboard, the camera is kind of almost like an afterthought to some extent, or it's just a very small kind of camera. And also, because of the thing that you mentioned in terms of the angle, when you come up to the board, if you tilt the board a little bit angled, then yes, it can still kind of capture you. But the other thing we noticed is when you actually go into a whiteboard, the video kind of turns off.
Right.
And so it's really kind of saying, well, if you want to be on video, be on video. If you want to do an electronic whiteboard, let's not be on video. While the other boards, the Microsoft Surface Hub and the Webex, they kind of treat it where it's more collaborative, where you're on video and whiteboarding kind of at the same time.
Right. So, yeah, I mean, it definitely is a different experience. So I think we covered a lot on the physical side of the Jamboard. Let's move on to the Webex board and talk about, we touched on the cart a little bit where it has no wheels, but I think the stand that it comes with, it looks very modern, very sleek, very Apple-esque is kind of the feeling I get from that one. I mean, what's your thoughts on it?
Yeah, it was super simple to set up. All the components are extremely robust, and it feels solid. It doesn't wobble or shake. And they tried to even think of the back end of the cart where all the caps and the screws are all hidden so you can't see anything. So it looks really nice. It looks elegant. The other thing is the board itself. It sits securely on the frame or the cart, and I actually like that it sits kind of straight up and down.
Yeah.
It makes it easy to be on video. You go to whiteboard. All of the people's whiteboards that are on the walls, those are kind of flush to the wall, and so it just makes it really natural in my mind. And then I think it really helps on the camera side, because when you have it, when the camera's at an angle, like we were talking about the Jamboard, and you're up close versus far away, you notice that. While if the camera is straight, it just looked a lot better.
Right. And I guess to talk about the display does feel, in my opinion, the display on the Webex board is probably the best. Just from an anti-glare perspective, the overall feel of it, it seems like the best display in my opinion.
Yeah, it's close. Like, I mean, I think that the Surface Hub has a nice display as well. It's kind of very modern, like a modern television. But you're right. I think the Webex board was just a little bit better
On the fit and finish, yeah. Okay, so let's move on to the Surface Hub and talk about the stand there. I mean, that stand has wheels. It's pretty solid. The Surface Hub, from a mounting perspective, is fixed mount, but it leans back a little bit.
It does, and like we were talking about the Google board, you can at least angle it. You can lean it back or lean it forward. The Webex board is just forward, and like I said, I kind of like that. But if you like to be able to angle it, then the Jamboard's kind of cool. The Surface Hub, it's permanently at a slight angle.
Back. It's
yeah.
like kind of leaning back. Yeah.
Yeah, and so if you're using it as kind of like if you're in a conference room and you kind of have it on the far end of the wall and you want to just look at content and it's kind of angled back, most people don't like that. If anything, you want it flush or even a little angled down so that you can see it. Now, when you're whiteboarding, which I guess is its main purpose, it's actually not that bad to have it angled back a little. You get, it's natural enough, and it's not a big angle, but for the video side of the equation, I would prefer it straight up and down.
Yeah, me too. The other thing with the Surface Hub, the stand has like a little cubby, which is kind of nice. You could put pens and whatever else in there. That was.
Well, I don't want to say, but you're going to need that cubby.
Yeah, you are going to need the cubby because we'll talk about that later. But yeah, I mean, you need a keyboard, right? So yeah, that's the one thing on the Surface Hub. So anything else physically? When we think about these boards, physical attributes. Anything you got?
Yeah, I think the only other one that we wanted to discuss was the cameras itself, and I think what's probably the biggest difference of the three, on the Surface Hub, the camera's external, and there's some pros to that. The default camera itself, I find that the angle of it or just the lens,
it's like a fisheye.
Yeah, it's not my favorite. But saving grace, you could put your own camera on it.
Yeah.
You don't have to use it. And because it's not built in, you can actually just pop that camera off and put your own camera on and never know the difference.
Right. Other than it just being it looks like a USB camera sitting on top of it.
That's right. It's not like an integrated camera.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would say the cameras are definitely a lot different on all three of them, to tell you the truth. The experience that we had with, video conferencing, the Webex Board, it had probably the best camera. One of the reasons it has a larger camera, and it will auto crop. It will automatically find, do facial recognition or people recognition, and then it will auto adjust and crop. So if you have someone on the left, it will zoom in and crop that person, which is great because then the far end has a much better experience, and then you don't need that whole fisheye kind of lens that you get on the Surface. The Jamboard's camera, I guess because of the cost, maybe that was an area they kept cost down, but it's definitely a little lacking on the camera. I mean, it works.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would definitely recommend a higher end, better camera on the Surface Hub, and the Webex Board. It's a great camera just built in.
All right, let's talk about whiteboards. So obviously they're boards, digital whiteboarding capability. Let's talk about each of them and their uniqueness. I think one of my favorite, or I guess the most intuitive whiteboard with the most capabilities in terms of like kind of cool little features, I think is the Jamboard.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest surprise is, we kind of, been, saying some of the maybe not so great features on the Jamboard in terms of its quality of the hardware. But, being Google, I mean, the software in terms of whiteboarding is definitely, top notch. I mean, I was very impressed by it, and the capabilities. I mean, you kind of, went through all of the features in terms of shape recognition, being able to do Google searches and bring in content or bring in images. I mean, that was very fun and very impressive.
I think what stood out to me in the Jamboard is, and I think as we talk more about our review of the boards themselves, I think the Jamboard, it is a digital whiteboard. That is what it is. And it can do video, but it's a digital whiteboard that can do video, in my opinion. And so it kind of makes sense that the one thing that it does really well. And the thing that they kind of added on, which is video, it checks the box, but I don't think it's really meant to collaborate over video primarily. It's primarily a whiteboard, and you got some video. That's my take on the Jamboard.
Yeah, and I think if you think about using it in a classroom, most of the time the teachers, they're probably not using the video. I mean, now with, everyone, doing schoolwork at home, I'm sure it's getting a lot more use. But the original intent when it was made was probably more of just an electronic whiteboard, and it does an excellent job. And so I could see if you're, a teacher and you want to bring in, images for your science class of, streams or fish or, whatever. It's impressive how easy it is to use and bring in content and whiteboard. And so I think they really kind of successfully accomplished that with that device.
Yeah. So let's move on to the Webex board. They've got a whiteboard in there. I feel like all the basic necessities of a digital whiteboard are covered. It's not that they do a bad job, they just don't take it to the level of the Google Jamboard. In terms of shapes and bringing in like a picture of your dog and that kind of thing. They've got notes, they've got the ability to do automatic shapes, they've got some things that straighten lines and do all that stuff. So I think overall, like if I need to use a whiteboard for the things that I need to use it for, it checks almost all the boxes.
Yeah, I mean, it's good. I think that it just doesn't take it to the level of Google, and we'll be talking about the Microsoft Surface. And, obviously we're talking about two companies, Microsoft and Google, that have a search engine.
Right.
And so I think they're taking advantage of that and building it in. So, we'll get to the Surface Hub, and it takes advantage, of its Bing, search capabilities, and Google taking advantage of its, Google and Chrome. So Cisco, obviously, they built a good whiteboard, but they haven't taken advantage of a search engine like what Microsoft and Google have.
Right. Yeah. So let's talk about the Surface Hub. In my opinion, I think the Surface Hub, it has a lot of additional features, kind of like the Jamboard. I just feel like the overall experience is a little clunky.
Yeah, I think what we're really getting at is the software.
Yeah.
When we were using the Surface Hub, the cart, the wheels, everything seems really tailored to a business use case, unlike the Google cart, which is more kind of school in my mind. And the screen, they have the anti-reflective glare, they have different ports so you can plug in your own kind of third-party camera systems, USB cameras. But the software, it's very PC-like. Mm-hmm. Some things they do very well, and we were talking about the bringing in the whiteboard and being able to bring in shapes. They do that as well.
Yeah.
But I think what really tipped Google off, in our minds, it sounds like a little bit better is its ease of use to get to those tools.
Right.
And the software on the Microsoft, yes, it's capable of doing all of those things, but some of the buttons I thought were just a little too small. So when you're trying to get to this huge board, just put a big button and make it easy for the people to use it. So that could change over time, but in its current state, that's the biggest area that I think Microsoft could improve is making that software more user friendly.
Yeah, I feel like they took they took their Microsoft their Windows OS essentially and remove some features and put it in tablet mode. And, it's not basically a new OS from the ground up to do this one purpose. And so I feel like with that, you get all these little buttons and things that you got to learn. And once you learn it, it's not that bad. Maybe I'm being a little too critical, but just the native use of it, when I used the Jamboard, it was like, this is easy, I get it, it works. Same with the Webex board. It was super easy, I used it, it worked. It may not have had all the features of the Jamboard, but the usability of it was super easy and intuitive. When we get to the Microsoft Surface Hub, I'm kind of like, this thing's a little clunky. Once you get used to it, it's not that bad, and it does have more features like being able to search and bring in content than the Webex board. But I think if I had to whiteboard, I think I'd lean more towards the Webex board. If it was between the Webex board and the Surface Hub, even though the Surface Hub has more features, I think I would lean towards the Webex board. And then if it was a pure play, you're just going to whiteboard, what would you pick? I think I would probably go Jamboard.
Yeah, and that's the difficult thing is when we look at these individual features, we definitely have opinions and we like certain capabilities. But then when we start to get into the entire experience,
right.
And we'll get that to the end where, based on either your ecosystem or what you're trying to do from a use case, then there's different priorities. But yeah, I think the Surface Hub is definitely a very capable device. It can do a lot of what the Google can do in terms of the Jamboard, in terms of whiteboarding. It's just the software usability could be refined. If we are looking at just, hey, I want to get to the board and start whiteboarding, mm-hmm. I think that the the Webex board is super intuitive. It has a big button whiteboard. You go
Yeah.
click at it and you just start whiteboarding. You
Yeah.
don't even have, and the Google is very similar to that. It starts with the whiteboard.
Yeah.
While, so
it's the only thing you can really do.
so yeah, but with the Microsoft, you get up to the screen, the font is tiny, and you're like, oh yeah, okay, whiteboard, and then you wait, and then you click it again, and you're like, oh, I clicked it twice or whatever, and so there's like little things like that just kind of you kind of question, but yeah, you can get used to any of the technologies, but if I had to choose as well, I think from a whiteboard perspective, ease of use would be the Webex board and the Jamboard, and full capabilities and functionality of a modern kind of like bringing in Google searches and things like that.
Yeah.
That's where the Jamboard kind of steps ahead.
Yeah, so let's move on to content and collaboration. So we can start with the Jamboard again, because I think that's an easy conversation. Really, it does jams and video calls, and that's it.
Yeah, so video calls, Google Meet, so
Yeah.
you can kind of either ad hoc just start it right there on the board. But here's the interesting one is when you start a Google Meet, it gives you a message saying, please, record this and send this to your participants, but there's no way to just add participants there. And so you're either taking a picture of it from your cell phone and emailing or texting it out, or you're writing it down, or you're typing it into an email or whatever. And I found that a little odd. Now, obviously, you can schedule a meeting with the Jamboard, with all three of them.
Right.
And then in that case, when the meeting comes up, it says, you click on the button, join the meeting, and that's super simple. But yeah, I mean, it pretty much does jams, whiteboards.
Yep.
And you can do a Google Meet.
Right. So then now we're comparing the Webex board versus the Surface Hub. And so the Webex board with Webex, the app on your phone, you can bring up spaces pretty easily.
Yeah, I think the big difference here in terms of content is how do you get to your content? How do you log in and get to it, right? Because there are some differences once you log in, but just to log in, there's some big differences. And with the Webex board, they use something called intelligent proximity, and you are already logged into the app, say on your smartphone. And so what you can do is you can see the board, it automatically detects the board on your app, and you can say, I want to take over that board, and I want that board to join into this space, which has all my content.
Right.
And so from that point of view, you don't have to log in. You've already logged into the app, so you don't have to do it twice, and you're just bringing in that board as a device.
Right.
Into your already logged in space from your cell phone, and then from there you can interact on the board. You can open up files, you can do whiteboarding, you can actually do a call and bridge everyone in. So it's a great experience having that intelligent proximity to kind of log in. Now on the Microsoft on the Surface Hub, because it's a PC, they really have PC methods of logging in.
Right.
And this is where
the keyboard,
and so even though a soft keyboard comes up, it's like, man, you have a long username or a long password, and you got to put them both in. And so you're logging in with your username and password. They have a couple other options. You can use their Authy login or their two-factor authentication login method, and then the other one is you can use like a USB key, which you have a certificate and put that on, and then hopefully you remember to take it out. And
it just seems so old, like old school. Like I feel like if you had Microsoft Teams on your phone, they should have done something proximity-like to make that login experience a little more seamless.
Yeah, and we're still looking. We're like hoping, right, that there's a better way, because the ways we found, we're just not happy.
Yeah,
so
yeah, they're gonna give you like a USB like wired sensor, and it'll be kind of bolted on. Who knows, right? But,
well, I haven't gotten to see if it works, but Microsoft Hello, where it actually does facial recognition and logs you in. I'd love to see that working on the board and it actually work, because that would be another, if it can do it successful, because in a conference room, it's not just your computer where it's expecting to just see your face. In the conference room, it's got to distinguish between everyone. But yeah, for now, the login experience on the Webex board is, by none the best
Yeah.
that I've experienced. But but then once you get to your content, that's where there's now a huge difference. So obviously Microsoft has a huge ecosystem with its Office 365, its OneDrive, and you name it. And so yeah, once you get past that login experience, you get all of your content if you're in the Microsoft ecosystem.
Right.
With WebEx, if you are already in the WebEx ecosystem, great, and you get all of that content. WebEx also has a way where they can link to, say, OneDrive or other external content systems,
Which box? And
exactly. So that kind of helps broaden the experience using WebEx, because maybe not everyone's in the WebEx ecosystem, but they are in Microsoft, and so you can still use WebEx but get to your Microsoft content. That has to be set up ahead of time through your administrator, but that's another nice way to go.
When I think about the use case for content in the boards, I think of stuff like maybe you pull up a PowerPoint. I couldn't imagine really natively, in either case, pulling up a Word document and using that live in a meeting. I would think I would go to my laptop and just share my screen to the board as opposed to logging into the board. But I think you just really got to think through your use case there around the content.
Yeah, just because you can do something doesn't always mean it's a good idea.
Right.
And after using going to the Surface Hub, logging in, bringing up like a new PowerPoint or an existing, I could actually go in and edit it. But after a while, I was like, why would I do that? Why would I be standing here? And it was very cumbersome just to get the content to come up. It would be so much easier, which it is, to just have it on my laptop and just wireless share and be done.
Yeah, call it a day.
And so that's where it's like when you start to look at these, it's like just because it can do something, most of the time, whatever is the least amount of effort, that's going to be the path most people use. Right. And I think, we'll get into the kind of, wireless sharing and wired sharing, but I have a feeling that's going to stay.
Wired and wireless sharing, the Surface Hub and the Webex board, I feel like they're very similar, the wired version. The wireless, we had a lot of issues with the Microsoft board. Like the content wouldn't resolve, and I read it could be some Bluetooth or wireless settings around the 802.11 settings.
Yeah, and so there's definitely some driver. We have you have to make sure that the endpoint on the laptop has the right driver because of the wireless. And you've probably played around a little bit more where it looked like the wireless is more of a direct wireless connection,
right?
Or going through your wireless in the office, but it looked more of that type of connection, and so so if things aren't lining up or if you don't have the right drivers, it could definitely cause issues. I know you were having where the screen was either cutting off.
Half the screen wouldn't resolve, and so that was kind of annoying. So I felt like the wireless sharing wasn't quite as sophisticated as the WebEx board. In the Jamboard, it doesn't really have wireless sharing, so can't really compare it there.
Right, and then I think in the with the Cisco, they have two types of wireless sharing. They have, if you're a corporate user where that's your corporate device in your domain, you would just use the native app and you just take over and wireless share. It's pretty straightforward. So yeah, with WebEx wireless sharing, and if you're looking at a guest coming in, they don't actually have to have any particular app. They can just use their native browser. They go to a particular URL that's advertised on the board, they put in the PIN, and they're wireless sharing, which is a really cool feature for your guests. Because the actual wireless sharing is through the cloud again, they actually don't have to be on your corporate Wi-Fi, and they're not talking directly to the board. They're actually going through the cloud connection to wireless share. So that works really well, surprisingly. You would think maybe some of the latency wouldn't, but it actually works really well. And it removes the need to kind of open up any security vulnerabilities inside a corporate network.
Right. So when we talk about wired and wireless, they all do wired sharing. So you could plug in an HDMI cable into the unit and you can share your screen. When it comes to wireless, it's really the Surface Hub and the WebEx board. And the WebEx board, in my opinion, has the best wireless sharing. Yeah,
and the other thing that I like in terms of on the WebEx board is you can actually extend the USB functionality of the board or of your computer to the board. And so in that case, you get to have remote touch.
Yeah.
And so you're controlling your laptop from the board. So rather than just wired connecting your laptop to the Webex board and then flipping through slides on your laptop or doing some application, you can actually put your laptop down at that point and interface with your operating system directly from the board. And mostly I've been trying this out on from a Windows laptop. I would imagine you could make an Apple computer a touchscreen.
Yeah, I think the in both the boards do that. We tried it with Windows, but both the board, the Surface Hub and the Webex board pass through that touch. So it's kind of a nice little feature.
Yeah, I liked it.
So let's talk about calling and conferencing, or conferencing and calling. So with the Jamboard, you get Google Meet, and so that kind of is what it is. It's the same experience from the Jamboard, very similar experience from the Jamboard that it is from your PC, and you just need a browser.
Yeah, and you register it with your G Suite account, so you need a Google account, and you register that, and you're in the Google ecosystem, so that works. Obviously, it's like you were saying, it's for jams, electronic whiteboards, and Google Meet. You're not bringing in, from at least everything we've tried and seen, your kind of Google Drive, Google Docs. You're not bringing in any of that content. The
Jamboard just acts as like a camera, speakers, and for that, and then you can escalate to a jam. But really, I think Google Meet, when comparing the other technologies, the Microsoft experience and the Webex experience, I think it works. It's just not as good as those other two.
Yeah, and the other thing is really you are only in the Google Meet, and so you're not really replacing a conferencing solution or a calling conferencing solution.
Right.
And so for being in Google Meet, great. But if you want to also then say, I want to use this to make an outbound call, to the PSTN network out there, it doesn't have that functionality. So some people are looking at these conferencing units, really replacing all of their conferencing in a particular room, and so it should replace your conference phone and your the video endpoint, as well as content sharing screens, wireless sharing, the whole thing all in one unit. And I would say on the calling side, that's kind of a feature that does not have.
Right. All right, so let's move to the Webex board. I think that when I think of the Webex board, I think of they took video collaboration, built a purpose-built appliance with whiteboarding capabilities. That's kind of how I look at it. It's an appliance that's built to collaborate.
Yeah.
So you can dial PSTN numbers, you could do SIP calling, you can do you can do everything.
WebRTC.
WebRTC. When I look at this, the Webex board is a full-featured collaboration device, whether it's PSTN dialing, whether it's SIP URI, whether it's it's the whole package.
When we were saying that, the Google electronic whiteboarding functionality is, top of the list, I would say the conferencing, video conferencing, and calling is where Cisco really shines. It's where the Webex board really shines. Right. They have the largest camera. It does people recognition, if you want to turn that feature on, where it can see who you are, put your name so that the other participants know who you are, who's talking. It follows you, so that it's always cropping. The microphone array, can pick you up fairly well. It actually will turn up the volume if you're farther away, so that the microphone is picking you up, and as you get closer, so you don't seem like you're shouting. I mean, really, the conferencing is where that unit shines.
Right. When comparing it to the other two solutions, there's no comparison there.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the the Surface Hub. I mean, you can, if you have all Microsoft Teams, the Surface Hub would work great for that. And I think it's really, if you want to use that Surface Hub to maybe dial somebody's phone number from the Surface Hub, you want to dial somebody in. You could always send them a Surface Teams meeting and they could dial in. But you can't if you just wanted to call someone directly from a conference room that the Surface Hub is in, you couldn't really do that.
No, yeah, so we logged in, I logged in as myself. I launched the Teams app. I actually have Teams calling on my laptop. I can use it as a phone, dial PSTN calling, right? I have the the Microsoft Teams phone system service, all of that. That does not carry over to the Surface Hub.
Yeah.
And I think this goes into, the software. Like Microsoft has these capabilities and it is a PC, but today I don't see that functionality. And so, it can't be my conference room phone.
Right.
It can definitely be a Teams meeting device. And so, yeah, I think if you're using it as a Teams meeting device, it works really well for that.
Yeah.
You can, have, schedule the board. When you walk in, you just say join. It gives you a time. It even gives you a little calendar. So yeah, there's a lot of, ease of use for integrating it in with Teams. But again, it is a purpose-built device really for Microsoft Teams.
Right.
And then you can bring up a web browser and other things, but you can't it's not, the PC itself isn't fully open. You can't download executables and run them.
Right.
So it is a kind of a lockdown device.
When I think of the 3 boards, I think Jamboard, appliance. That's an appliance. Webex Board, that's an appliance. When I think of Surface Hub, it just feels, I think it's a PC that does whiteboarding, in my opinion.
And Teams and
well, it does all those things,
yeah.
but it's a computer. It looks like basically you took a magnifying glass on a Surface laptop, blew it up. The screen looks very similar. The button even to turn it on is kind of like, instead of it being on the top of the display, it's on the bottom. But it feels like they took a computer and just put a big screen on it.
Well, I think that's exactly, it is a computer.
Yeah,
and so I think you're absolutely right. And if they can improve that software from a user experience, make larger buttons, streamline the experience. I mean, we had in the other videos where you have a video call, you called into a video, you joined into a meeting, right? And usually it starts with video, and then you go up to the board and you hit the whiteboard button. Well, everyone else is seeing the whiteboard, but you're not. You first have to minimize the video call. And you would think, well, if I hit the whiteboard, shouldn't that auto minimize? And so it's just another little button that you do, or you minimize the video first and then share whiteboard, or you share whiteboard and then those should be combined. And those little things.
Yeah, that goes back to the clunkiness of it. It does it checks a lot of boxes. I think once you learn it and you get through that, it's like no big deal. But just at first use, they can make it better. They can make it better.
But again, because you can add PSTN services to Microsoft Teams. However, because that doesn't come through on the Surface Hub, they've really at this point relegated that device to really be a electronic whiteboard and bring it into Teams meetings.
Right.
And then again, the electronic whiteboard, great whiteboard. You can do Bing searches, bring in content, which is great. But those are the main two uses, and so you're still going to need to have a conference room phone on your table, and you're still going to have to dial that separately to call in people that are outside. Or if it's a scheduled Teams meeting, then you have a Teams conference number, and then people would dial into the Teams conference number. But you can't use the board to dial out to someone that's just on a cell phone. So you still have to have a traditional phone. And that's where I think the Webex board, because you can tie a PSTN, you can tie an actual 10-digit DID number to the Webex board. It can be your one device to replace all your conference room devices.
Yeah. So I think that really the last thing to talk about is just overall use cases. And maybe we could just go through each of the boards. I mean, it's really hard as we're looking at all these boards to say this is the board you would go with. I like to think through, what are some of the use cases where it would make sense. And, when I think about the Jamboard, I would say if somebody has 100% Google, they're using all Google stuff, and they're just looking for a digital whiteboard to, collaborate with and really just document things, I think I would just go with the Jamboard.
Well, I would say too, you're a Google, and you're using Google, and you're using Google Meet.
Yes.
So if you're using, Google, but then you're using something else, WebEx, Zoom,
anything
Teams, anything else,
pick it,
then probably not. But
Yeah,
if you're big on Google Meet, then this device just plugs right in. And to take it a step further, if you're a classroom setting, it looks like this device, because of its ruggedness, was kind of meant for the classroom.
Yeah. So I think schools, schools that are running the Google Suite, yeah, makes sense. Outside of that, I think you just got to really think of what's the use case for this and how are we going to use it. If you don't have Google, because it requires G Suite to add these boards in, I would say you would look to something else if you didn't have G Suite.
Yeah, and what we find is most of the times people already have something. They're using some sort of collaboration, so these endpoints are supposed to complement that.
Right. So let's talk about the Webex board. I mean, I think that could go. If you're running Webex, obviously Webex conferencing, it's pretty much that's what you would go with from a board perspective. But if you're using maybe a third party conferencing provider, Zoom, there's a bunch of others. They all support SIP, and this endpoint supports SIP native.
Yep.
So I think this would be a good option, even if you had Zoom or some other platform. Obviously, if you have WebEx, yeah, that's a no-brainer. But you could bring those into those meetings from a video standpoint.
Yeah, and that goes back to looking at it from you're the ecosystem that you're in, and so if you're using Google Meets, obviously the Jamboard could be a good fit for you. If you're using WebEx and WebEx meetings, then the Webex board is a good fit, and if you're using Microsoft Teams, then obviously the Surface Hub it can be a good fit. But then you go, well, what if you want to cross mix?
Yeah.
And people do. They go, I like this device, but this is what I'm using for my conferencing, and so I would say that we're starting to see that a little bit on the Webex board side. They do have WebRTC. They do have it working and programmed to work with Microsoft Teams. So you could actually be using Microsoft Teams as your collaboration platform, but you go, well, I really like this Webex board, this big iPad looking thing. It works really well. So you have a couple options there. You can use the native WebRTC kind of web browser that's built in to the Webex board, or you can integrate from a back-end perspective CVI, which is the Cloud Video Interop, which will natively take that SIP connection from the Webex board, connect it to Azure, and then that gateway will then natively connect it into that Teams meeting, and so then you even get a better user experience. You can use multiple screens, you can have content on one screen, video on the other, so it really opens up the door if you said, I really like these, say WebEx endpoints, such as the Webex board, but I'm using Microsoft Teams as my conferencing. You can do that, but there's not a lot of other companies kind of really bridging that gap.
Yeah, especially from a board perspective.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the Microsoft Surface Hub. I think if you're running Teams, this is probably an easy choice. The one thing I would say is, if you're looking to put it in a room, is you're not going to get that PSTN access. And, for me, the user experience is kind of a detractor.
Yeah, like you can get used to anything. It's really software. Microsoft's a huge software company, so you would hope that over time they really kind of refine the user experience and some of the capabilities, because they have these capabilities in the native team client that you would run on your laptop.
Yeah.
And so for them to bring that into the Surface Hub just seems logical.
Right.
I don't have their roadmap. I'm not sure what they're going to do, but we could hope. But yeah, it is a logical choice if you are all in on Microsoft Teams and you're kind of building out Teams rooms and you're like, yeah, let's have Surface Hubs. I could definitely see that. It just hopefully over time Microsoft will improve the Surface Hub software stack.
Yeah. So I think overall they all do a pretty good job at what their core purpose was. I think there's just the nuances, and hopefully I think we covered a lot of them.
Yeah, and obviously you've done various videos on each device, which should definitely be checked out to kind of get to see and see all the functions and features that you went through.
Well, cool. Well, thanks for being here with me today, Marshall, going through all these things.
Yeah, this is good stuff, and we'll have to do it again probably in another year because right now it's all changing. Yeah,
it's all changing. All right. Well, hey, so we'll put a link in the description of all of the other videos where we went in detail about the Jamboard. We went over all the boards, and we'll put the links down below. If we said anything in this video that you're like, hey, I'd love to know more about that, make sure you leave a comment. Make sure you like and subscribe so you get all of our content as we release it. And we will see you on the next one. Thanks for watching.